Welcome to Take the Lead Radio. This is Dr. Diane Hamilton, and I'm so glad you joined us today because we have Wolfgang Koester on the show. He is the CEO and founder of FIREapps, and he is the ultimate expert on everything currency and cryptocurrency related. And with all the Bitcoin questions out there, today's show is going to be fascinating. So I hope you stay tuned, and we'll be back right after this. Well, I am here with Wolfgang Koester, who is the CEO and co-founder of FIREapps. He has more than 30 years of extensive experience in currency markets and working with numerous global Fortune 1000 companies and government entities. Prior to co-founding FIREapps, he served as president of GFTA, a quantitative currency management company. Koester has been named one of the 100 most influential people in finance by Treasury Risk magazine, and is regularly included in Global Finance's annual Who's Who in Foreign Exchange. He's a frequent speaker at industry and academic events, and his work has appeared in The Economist, The Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, Treasury and Risk, and AFP Exchange, among other industry publications. You've probably seen him on CNN, CNBC, Fox Business, and Bloomberg, and everywhere else. So it's really nice to have you here, Wolfgang.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, this is going to be an interesting show because you're going to talk about something that a lot of people are really confused about. Who a lot of people have no idea what's going on out there. And before we get into Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, can you just tell me more about what FIREapps does? Because I mean, I remember when I first met you, you were explaining how it's real time trying to transfer currency and different things, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool what you do. And I want to know just a little bit more about your background and the background on FIREapps.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's interesting. I mean, as you said, I've been in this for over 30 years, but I've actually never worked for a bank, which is interesting when you're dealing with currencies. Yeah. I've always worked on the corporate side. That's what I started with. I actually started my career during college at IBM, then went over to Audi. And at Audi, I actually started looking at this in Ingolstadt, Germany. And really what this company today does and what we've been doing since 2000 is we're a software company. We're known as the currency data company. So if a corporation wants to understand anything about currencies, how they flow through their income statements, how they impact their balance sheets, how they impact their revenues, et cetera, we're the go-to company. And it goes as far as companies then say, now I understand it. Now I actually want to manage it and lower my risk. Now I have complete visibility and transparency to how foreign exchange flows through my accounts receivable, through my cash, and all the risk that it creates. And it's very complicated. It's a data problem, really. But when you apply software to it, you can actually manage it. And so today, the Googles, the Pfizers, the Accentures of the world, as well as companies as low as $100 million in revenues, literally leverage FIREapps technology to manage that risk away so they can, and that's always my goal has been, help companies live in an environment and act in an environment as if currencies weren't going to matter because it was completely automated and under control.
Well, you've really got an interesting company and background. I mean, that's not easy what you've created. Was there any competition to do this when you first got in? I mean, what's the competition like now compared to then?
No, there really was none. And I think it's one of those things I was so focused on really, and I was lucky early on in my career to see how impactful currencies are and how they've been increasing ever since. I mean, when I got into this market, it was still already a big market, but it was probably $250 billion a day market. Today, it's a $5 trillion a day market. And really, I was just lucky to be there first and really interested in it and just kept digging deeper and faster than anybody else into figuring out how to solve that problem. So even today, we have very little competition. We own this industry and are very proud of our customers and how we continue to help them really have no impact on their earnings per shares, their revenues, et cetera, because we just help them take it away. So we increase tremendous value even for the investors and shareholders for these corporations, because that's a risk that they really don't need to have today anymore.
It's interesting that you're in this. To me, that's could be like a dry, like you need to have a dry kind of personality to embrace currency, but you're a fun guy. And I'm like, how do these two things go together? I mean, did you ever think you were going to go in that direction? I mean,
Not really, though. I have to say, I think most great companies are actually, founded by one, but then they have a really great partner. And I, many years ago in '87, met a great guy who we worked together, but then he went off to become the controller of Microsoft. And when I called him in 2000, he'd been a great friend, one of my best friends. I said, here's the business I'm going to do. Do you know any financial accountant that can be a little bit drier side? I wouldn't say dry side, but a little bit drier, more grounded side of the business, and that really understands this and likes data and likes this sort of field. And he called me 3 days later. He says, I know exactly the guy. You know him really well. And I go, really? Great. Who is it? And he goes, it's me. So, and he had left Microsoft and ended up then moving to Phoenix. And we started building this out of the guest house, this business. So it's kind of fun.
Wow. That's a great story.
Great.
Well, I want to get into some of the bigger issues that are out there right now, because I can't think of a better guy to explain this to people. And okay, Bitcoin, cryptocurrency. No one really gets this that I know. Let's just, who I know. They are very confused by it. Can you explain just what it is and just the bigger picture of what cryptocurrency is?
Yeah, and maybe I'll start with Bitcoin and then go into cryptocurrency. But really, Bitcoin is one cryptocurrency. And cryptocurrency really comes from the word that it's a currency that is based on cryptography. And cryptography is really supposed to be the technology that comes from the old Greek systems of really keeping something very secret, very quiet, very veiled, so that people can't touch something. So really, what they were trying to achieve is achieve a currency that people would be very safe and secure in. That's why it's for cryptography. Now, then what they needed, besides security, they needed a way to trace transactions, to actually, if somebody buys it, somebody sells it, how do you actually trace that and how do you communicate that? And so that is what they then leveraged blockchain technology, which I know everybody always hears about. Well, blockchain and Bitcoin and that kind of the same thing. No, it's blockchain is a technology, what is also referred to as a distributed ledger technology. Think about the ledger coming back from the accounting. So there's your tracing of the transactions. And at the end of the day, a Bitcoin is a one currency that leverages blockchain technology in a cryptological, if you wish, environment to actually create value. The way they created value is they said, we're going to issue, and this is 2008, 2009, we're going to issue 21 million Bitcoins. That's it, 21 million. And if you think about economics and demand and supply, that means as more people buy, the demand goes up, but the supply stays as 21 million. So why does the price keep rising? It's because they have issued at this point no more than 21 million Bitcoins. But don't forget that ended up being the first, and therefore, as anything like FIREapps really is, you become known as the industry, and so Bitcoin became known as the industry. But there are actually about 130 other cryptocurrencies out there, and really, hopefully, that gives you a little bit of a sense of a lot of other people are trying to create this market, this value for a currency. I'm sure we'll talk later on that now they wish they wouldn't have called it currency, but it is a currency, and where they really create a value and make that an exchange, a digital exchange.
So, okay, so is Bitcoin then the term, just like the dollar is a term and compared to euro or yen? Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely correct. It is a term for a value-created currency that is backed really only by belief and the limit of supply. Okay,
and so you track these. Okay, we'll look at it like a dollar. It's this cryptocurrency that we call Bitcoin, in something we call a ledger that you call a blockchain, but that's just basically a way of tracking where the money goes. The blockchain.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Absolutely correct.
I just want to make sure I get it.
Yeah. No, it's good. No, it's good. It's unfortunately a lot of people miss this point. They really start talking about Bitcoin and the value, but nobody knows what it really is. So I'm glad you asked that question.
Well, it's the instructor in me. I want to make sure I get it so I can explain it to somebody else, right? So it's very confusing because there's so many of these ledgers, these blockchains. There's so many different names for all the different currency, and so is it going to be where we're like the whole world's on the euro or the whole world's on the dollar, where it's one type, or is it always going to be all these different ones?
Well, I mean, the dream has been that we should all be on one currency. The fact is, I think that's rather unrealistic, because it is kind of like saying that we should all, no matter what the value of your company is, we should all be valued as one company in the world. So no matter what you do, the Dow Jones level, the Dow Jones price is actually related to all companies in the world, and there's no ups and downs. And I think that's unrealistic, because at the end of the day, a currency today is still the share price of a country. And I think thinking that we're going to have one currency, one world currency, is unrealistic.
Okay. So when we get to this point where we're using Bitcoin or whatever the term is for whatever country we're talking about, but what does this mean for the financial system and maybe for individuals, investors, corporations, governments to go to this kind of system?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So what it really means is, and I think we should all be very thankful for the pioneers that, as I call them, that really came and brought blockchain cryptology and a currency, created this value. We should be very thankful for them, because at the end of the day, they're taking two inefficiencies out of the market. One, they're taking the inefficiency of time out of the market. Today, if you're sending a currency and transferring and putting into another currency and send it to another country, it takes 2 days minimum. And with digital currency, which I think what we're going to get to, is we're actually talking about instantaneous. You're going to go right now, right here, and it's in an account somewhere else, because that's what Bitcoin is. You do it and you're done, you're finished. And I think that that's number one. Number two is the cost of transactions are rather expensive today. If you're doing a wire transfer, even for $500, maybe you have to spend $25, which is 5% in just transferring your money into maybe your own account. So it's very expensive. So what Bitcoin and the cryptocurrencies have done, they've taken that inefficiency, they've leveraged technology and brought us into what I consider the 21st century. Now, what that's going to do is and it already has, pushed governments into actually creating their own cryptocurrency. And I'm going to refer to it, maybe we can from here from on, as a digital currency. So United States, the Federal Reserve Bank will issue its own federal dollar, or I call it digital dollar. The Russians have come out and they've said, Putin himself has come out and said, I'm going to create and open up a crypto ruble in January of 2018. This is very imminent. Wow. I think it's really interesting to look at it. And one should read, and I've read this pretty closely. When he announced it, he actually said, I'm going to do this for two reasons. One, I'm going to do it so we own our own ledger, our own blockchain, and we in Russia can therefore follow all transactions better and take fraud and tax evasion out of the system,
right? Which
is really mind-boggling.
Do you agree it'll do that?
Yes, I do. I think they'll do it. I think I know the Federal Reserve is working on it and has been working on it since 2015. The reason that the Federal Reserve is going to take longer is they're going to have to, and they will, ensure that when they come out with that blockchain technology, with that cryptology, that combination, that distributed ledger technology, it has to be safe and secure. It cannot be something that somebody could break into. It's got to be, and it will be, Fort Knox.
Okay, so if the U.S. government comes up with their own ledger of blockchain, aka, what happens to all the other ones that are out there in the United States?
I think eventually the world's going to turn that way because they have to. I mean, it's just otherwise everybody's just going to be attracted to only where they have digital currencies. So this is kind of interesting, as you point that out, is the Chinese are all of a sudden saying, wait a minute, let's race. Maybe we can beat others in this, and with this become the dominant currency and displace the dollar. So this is starting to actually going to end up going into a race. Who's going to get this out quick enough, safe enough, and going to be able to back it? And this could be game changing. If somebody does it too slowly, doesn't announce it, doesn't do it, it's going to be very different. And what's interesting about this is this blockchain technology and the ledger and this currency actually will be also used to issue debt. So not only can you, which is, for example, what Venezuela is doing and thinking about it, they want to do it very quickly to actually save their economy. They're going to issue debt on this ledger and currency. So Venezuelans will all of a sudden be able to open up their market again, because they've obviously had a pretty rough going, and they weren't able to create a currency that is backed by oil. So that for them, that's a must. But this is going to get bigger and bigger and stronger.
Well, you bring up something that's kind of interesting. A couple things there that are interesting. First of all, what is it backed by? Before we had the gold standard, you have different things, you know, they're backing things. And you, at the beginning, you said people, they issued, or who, you know, who's issuing, and if you can have only a certain amount. How do you determine the amount? I mean, it gets very complicated without losing everybody, you know. I gotta get too deep, but you know what I mean? Those are the kinds of things that come to my mind.
Yeah, and I think that's right. So when you think about, let's just stick with the United States.
Okay.
The Federal Reserve Bank prints money today. We all know that, to the to the detriment at times. We all wonder, should they stop printing money? And you know, they do it to get the economy moving, to start some sort of inflation, to get the GDP up, and then hopefully stop printing money, maybe increase interest rates. And so they're managing today already the economy in parts with the mixture of the value of the currency and especially interest rates. So all this does, if you really, you know, bring it down to the bottom, is just digitize that process. So they will know how much currency they will want to issue in order to keep the value, and they will know when to actually take some out. And so they will actually just replicate what they're doing today in a digital environment. So when you think that back to Bitcoin, they issued 21 million. Well, whatever the debt is that the United States issued, eventually that's what they're going to issue via a digital means. That's all the difference is.
Well, it's very confusing when you start listening to, I mean, how long has it been around? 9 years or something? And then all of a sudden it's at the top of the discussion all of a sudden. Why do you think it's at the top right now?
Well, I mean, it's from the investors and speculators. It's, you know, it's been the biggest ROI in many people's lifetimes. You know, if I think of my sons, you know, the millennials, a lot of them have been getting into this thing. And my son called me the other day and says, well, maybe, you know, what should I be doing with this? I just made another $900 today. He says, that's real money.
Well, that's a lot. And
it is a lot. Well, it is a lot. And he didn't use a lot to start this with. He was just in London. He was actually 2 years ago. He was, just leaving high school. He was in London at my office. And as he's interested, and we've talked about this for years, but it hasn't made the headlines then, he actually went to one of the first meetings of Ethereum. That's what he ended up looking at. But you know, he's kind of, so there is this interest of, well, how does all work? That's curiosity that has come into from that area. And so it's, what now has happened is investors and have seen this immense ROI going from, in, you know, sub 1 cent value in 2008 to 17,000 now on the Bitcoin level. And so there's a massive interest in this. And since the demand is the same, the supply is the same and demand keeps going up, and actually, interestingly enough, and I hear these stories a lot, is a little difficult to get out, which is interesting. People are slowly but surely buying, and everybody's talking about it. So everybody wants to have something. And quite frankly, the younger people actually want it because they also want to talk about it at the party. Yeah, I have Bitcoin, I have Ethereum. No, I have this other cryptocurrency.
well, that's interesting. Well, okay, so I saw something you wrote that was about the Dutch tulip bulb bubble of the 1600s. And so how is this not going to turn into that? Can you explain what happened then and what they're trying to avoid?
Well, yeah, I always try to stay away from the valuation of a Bitcoin or anything else. And yes, you're right. Jamie Dimon, for example, also referred to it as the tulips. And whether it's the tulips or whether it's the gold mining, we all look for parallels when something grows very quickly, very fast, and is it founded? Yeah, and so you know, we all like, you know, we on our return on money, we all want it to go as fast as possible. But we also know when something, you know, goes up fast, it can come down just as fast, if not faster, typically faster. So I think that in the tulips, the 16th or 17th century were really about, the only place that you could do these tulips because the way they drained the water in Holland was in Holland, and therefore there was this value there. And all of a sudden people figured out they could do it somewhere else. And then the limited supply, i.e. 21 million, the limited supply gave up, and all of a sudden everybody had the supply, and therefore the demand stayed the same, and then the price comes way off, and people said, well, is there really value in it? That's kind of one of those parallels that people try to make in order to say, isn't this a bubble? I have no idea whether Bitcoin is going to continue to go up. I've heard people talk about it going back down to 5,000. I've had others talk about 100,000. I honestly don't know. What I do know is that this is pushing governments to actually digitize the financial system much more. And that's really great for individuals. I go to church the other, a week and a half ago, whatever, 2 Sundays ago, and I didn't have any money on me. I didn't have any hard, kind of paper money on me. I couldn't give anything. And so if you get it to that level, you can say, okay, now it's digitized. Now I can give something. I just didn't have money on me. It's as simple as it is. And, and there are all these other areas like, in town here, there's Bravo, which is a tipping company. They say, well, a lot of people don't have cash in their pocket anymore. Use my application to actually tip somebody. Another form of digital currency, probably based on some sort of blockchain technology. So Bravo is doing it. I know if you saw, they were on, the Swim with the Sharks, or whatever that show is called. Yeah. And so everybody's looking into it. How do you digitize this?
Well, okay. So then why is there a Senate bill that wants to criminalize it? And they don't want it, they want it privatized? What are they trying to do with that? They don't want it.
Yeah, that's really great. And this is probably one of those unknown things that nobody's talked about. The Senate has a bill that they discussed on November 28th, so this is pretty recent, that's in front, which actually edits, and they do this a lot, which actually edits a definition. And the definition is, what is a financial institution and what are they issuing? And if they are a financial institution and they're issuing anything, paper, in this case, cryptocurrency, then they need to make that very transparent. And if they don't create transparency, then we're going to shut it down. It's criminal activity if you're then trying to, and the criminal activity actually becomes by the individuals who then are deemed to hide transactions from the government. And they're trying to shut that down, and they will, in my opinion. It's something that nobody talks about, and I think it's going to very quietly going to happen, maybe not as quietly as we continue to talk about it. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like saying, listen, Bitcoin, isn't it an exchange? Aren't there brokers? And if there are, don't we, the government and the Securities Exchange Commission and others, have the fiduciary responsibility to protect the individuals from scams and all these sort of things and make it visible? And if they don't make it visible, then we're going to shut it down. And the reality is that, as we started off, Bitcoin is actually based on the fact that it is secret and that nobody sees the transactions. Which is, when you really look at it, and I thought this is when I thought Bitcoin was really actually going to take off, is there was this virus you may recall called the WannaCry virus, where people were hacked into their own computers, and that what they did is they took the data from them, and if you wanted it back, do you remember this?
You held your computer hostage. Is that the one?
That's it. That's exactly the one. And do you know what you had to do in order to get it back?
You had to pay the Bitcoin, didn't you? Or you had to pay something?
Yeah, exactly right. You had to pay 300 Bitcoin, which today would be a lot of more money than it was then. But at that point, it actually, probably that fact also really further raised the eyebrows of people in the government, saying, well, wait a minute, we now can't help people, individuals, trace that money and maybe find out who actually did this virus and significantly profited from this virus. And so that's, again, lack of transaction and visibility, whereas if you're writing checks or you have to transfer money to an account, they can trace that. It's gone at the beginning, and people say, well, government says, I need to see who did this, where did they come from, et cetera, so we can, find those criminals who did some very criminal bad things and, excited a lot of people negatively.
Well, how is stealing Bitcoin or doing certain things like that different than just hacking into any bank, getting into, I mean, is it going to be harder to get into our United States version, obviously, than even a bank, I imagine? Because you're saying Putin's doing this right away, but we're taking our time with the U.S. to make sure we get all the security stuff out of the way. I mean, is it any different than just hacking a bank or hacking something like that if somebody's trying to steal this stuff?
Well, I mean, not much different, hopefully even more secure, but even hacking into banks has been extremely difficult, and there's lots of security around that. So I think that people are working on this already. But you're right. At the end of the day, it's digital, it's computers. Mm-hmm. And the good thing is it can be cloud, so it can be hidden, and it could be, where is it? It's not like physical Fort Knox. It's somewhere where people won't know where it even is, and if they do, how to get into and be tracked from that. So there is a whole new science, and that's what pushes us in the 21st and will 22nd century is its technology, and as such, it needs to be very safe and secure. Right. And I have all the confidence it will be.
Well, okay, so I think it's kind of confusing. Like, can you use this Bitcoin right now, or are you just investing in it? Is it just all theory? I think a lot of people are confused by that part of it. Like, what your son's doing, is he actually spending it? Is he investing? I mean, what are people actually doing with it right at this point?
Yeah, I think that's actually a great point. What you're actually seeing is people only buying it and seeing their, what I call, paper value on their computer going up, but they actually often don't even know how to get out.
Right.
And maybe they do, maybe they don't. But how do they spend it? Well, there's some companies who are thinking about, and I think it's still more of a marketing thing, can I actually use Bitcoin to do it? But it was interesting, the Winklevosses, which are kind of the key guys on Bitcoin that really marketed them for the last 5 years, they were on a show just after me the other day with Maria Bartiromo,
right.
And they talked about how they will never ever spend that money because it's just going to go up. And so if they look back of ever spending the money, and they once did one transaction where they tried to pay somebody, and they now look back and see how expensive it was, because obviously the value went up to do it. So they have no interest of ever spending that money, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Without spending that money, it's all paper value. It reminds you of people who are paper on value, but if they can't spend the money, how they're living? Well, they come from a well-to-do background anyway, so they don't need the money. But is Bitcoin going to be the currency that's going to do that? I don't know. It's I think the answer is going to be the digital currencies issued by the governments are going to be the means of doing it, and it's not going to be Bitcoin. But I don't know.
So what happens to all the Winklevoss money when that happens? When it's covered?
I hope they figure out a way to get out and preserve and maybe exchange that into digital dollars to preserve their billionaire status as they claim they have today. So don't know. That's like anything is, you should. My dad had a saying years ago. He said it's hard to make money. It's harder to keep. I think this applies.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Well, how much did I read that there's $150 billion worth of digital currency right now in circulation?
Yeah, that's about it. I mean, there's all sorts of valuations obviously play into that. That's probably right.
But I like that you break it down to saying that represents less than 0.01%. So that's 1/100th of 1% of currency out there, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, if everybody was talking about the futures issue of Bitcoin, and it came out, and it was a big hype, and there's going to be a lot of volume on there. And if you looked at it, it was roughly $47 million traded in a 24-hour period on the CBOE. Well, when you think about $47 million versus a $5 trillion a day market, that's not too big. It's not make too much of a dent. I mean, I could literally, and I've done it before, sell $500 million against the Japanese yen within one transaction. Right now, it'd take me about 15 seconds to do.
Is the way how fast everything can be done now is amazing, and that's what you learned how to do and taught, with your company. And it kind of reminds me of when I was in lending, and I think I told you this in my correspondence with you. When we were in, I was in lending, you used to not be able to get the funding right away. You had to wait until maybe a few days, and people buying a house and they were out with their U-Haul. Well, sorry, it didn't fund in time. Go stay at a hotel, right? So
right.
Now everything's instantaneous. And a lot of people have old systems like the past, don't you think there's a lot of CXOs out there that are used to maybe even using Excel spreadsheets and different things to track all this? And what's it going to do, having this change?
It's going to force automation. Before, it was a ROI discussion about what's the value versus something else we're doing in order to automate my processes, to manage my balance sheet risk, to manage my income statement risk, and to manage my transactions, my processes, and my systems. What's the ROI? What cost savings am I going to have over the next 3 years? And what's my investment to do it? That's still going to be somewhat the debate, but it's going to really be the debate. Well, the ROI is actually going to get greater because the settlement of transactions are going to be immediate and the cost is going to be a lot lower. And what that's going to do is everybody's going to say we must automate. And it's going to impact margins of corporations so much that if you don't do it, your margins are going to be worse than your competitors, and then investors will invest in your competitors. So at the end of the day, it's going to further the automation of what, quite frankly, a lot of companies have already done over the last 10 years. I mean, if I'm talking about, customers of ours, they've automated these processes already. For them, this is going to be really easy. But I think there's going to be the more mature markets and maybe the people who didn't want to be the early guys, but this is 10 years ago that this started, not today.
Mm-hmm.
That really now say, well, now I have to do it. I've been wanting to do other things, but now I have to do it because otherwise it's going to have such a negative impact. So it's going to continue to further automation and make it more real. Lots of companies, and I'm not talking just about the Googles and the Accentures and the Ericssons of the world who've all done this already. I'm also talking about $100 million revenue companies or $500 million, or here, proud in Phoenix, Arizona, JDA Software has been doing this for years. They're great customer, great people. They have the vision. Their CFOs, treasurers, and their managers, they're all really embraced this from years ago and continue to work on automating it, on making it better, because they understand that this creates value for the shareholders. So this isn't just the big companies doing it and now the smaller, it's companies of all sizes. We have lots of companies that are 150 million in revenue. They're already doing this.
Okay, so just the everyday person out there listening to this, what impact is this going to have this year? Are they going to see much of it affecting their lives where they need to get into digital currency, or is all this just going to happen to people where it's just this is what way it is now? I mean, is it gradual? What is it? Anything this year, or is it a slow progression where we're going to just start the cash can be gone and that kind of thing?
Well, I have this, it's the youth, as we all know, who, when my kids, 10 years ago went to a computer, it was so easy for them because that's what they grew up with, and we didn't, and we had to figure out and work and study how to actually work a computer, and these kids just do it intuitively. And, if I look at my kids now, obviously in college, he's studying pre-med, and what he's done is he goes out with his friends, and they go out to dinner, and one person puts down a credit card, and all the others get on their phones and they, via an application, actually transfer money to the person who put the credit card down. By the time they leave the restaurant, everybody is settled and everybody's good to go.
Right.
So it's actually already happening. It's just that there's other means that have been created, such as these Bitcoins of the world, which they're very specific applications where people are already using digital. The only difference is going to be they don't have to put that credit card down anymore to go down this road. They'll actually do that with the restaurant owner themselves. And
we're already seeing a lot of PayPal built into things and different things people just don't think about when they're shopping, right?
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
Well,
so this is already coming.
It is. I mean, do you think how long before we see that the dollar is completely gone? I mean, is there going to be a point where we have no physical dollars? soon?
Yeah, I believe that. And I think that's a hard one for people to do who've grown up all their lives with all these currencies. But, I grew up in Germany, as you know, and when I grew up in Germany, I lived in Düsseldorf. And if you drove west for 45 minutes, you were in Holland, and you had to use Dutch guilders. And if then you drove down another 45 minutes and you went to Belgium, you used Belgian francs. So we used to have all these currencies always in our wallets. Then the euro came out. And really what it did, for a while, it had the euro and in every country their currency. And they said deadline is when everything is going to be converted to euro is going to be whatever, a year from now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be the same thing here. It may take longer, but it's going to be, hey, there's going to be the US dollar. We're going to have the US dollar and equal value. And I think that's really important. Equal value of the US dollar will be the digital dollar. So you can choose whether you want to use physical or digital currency. Both are there. Both are the same value. And people are going to just get more and more used to being in church and giving via their phone money as a donation. And so I think it's, it's going to be not for my kids. It will be not as much of a transition anymore because they're actually already doing it via applications.
So it's almost, to me, I'm envisioning being at the grocery store, the woman that pulls out her big old checkbook still compared to everybody else that gives them the debit card, right? It's just, they're the same thing, but which one's more of a pain, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly right. Or, I have a chip in there and I wave it over the thing and it already does it.
Right.
But it goes via credit card. So yeah, same thing.
Well, what do you think I didn't ask you that people often ask you that we need to help people understand more about cryptocurrency and the whole Bitcoin and everything that's going on right now? Is there any other big major areas that people just get really confused about?
I mean, just understanding what it is, I think and what the value is. I think we already discussed. I think that nothing that comes to mind right off the bat. I mean, if anything, the other part that drives the governments like Putin is taxation. There's a question of if there's a currency transaction and there's gains, are actually the holders of Bitcoin going to disclose that as a capital gain? And it goes back a bit. When I was in London, I hear people saying, well, I'm not going to have to declare that as tax because the government can't see it. And I'm like, wow, that's the definition of tax evasion right there, as far as I'm concerned. But it's no different than 25. Sorry?
If you can't cash it out, then you don't have long-term, short-term capital gains. How do you do that?
Yeah, right. At some point, you're going to have to, right? But the issue is a little bit of the way that people said, well, I'm holding money in Switzerland 25 years ago, and I'm not declaring that, nor am I declaring the income of that because the United States government can't see it.
Right,
this to me is the same thing in the 21st century, where we all of a sudden saying, well, there's Swiss banks called Bitcoin and you can't see it, so I'm not taxing it. And the United States government, including also the Russian government, many other governments saying, no, we're going to stop that immediately. There's no way you're going to not have to do that. And you're going to have a line item today in our taxes. So we have to sign that we don't hold money anywhere else that we haven't disclosed. And you're going to have the same thing. It's going to be one line item and to edit, and that game is over.
Well, okay, so it brought up one more thing I think a lot of people are confused about is what does it mean to mine it? I think a lot of people are a little bit fuzzy about that. When you're mining Bitcoins, what does that mean?
Oh, yeah, mining is basically, miners are actually the brokers that are around the center. That's the way I look at it. So mining is brokering it. So the miners are actually the people that are brokering the Bitcoin to others. That's the way you have to think about it. So you basically have the exchange, and then you have brokers who have the authority to buy and sell that currency that means that Bitcoin as a way of doing it, and they call them miners, which is kind of interesting because there's lots of parallels to the gold mining days and gold rush.
Well, there's so many things that if you can go into, like there's going to be a maximum number after a certain number of years, they're not going to add any more Bitcoins. Is that still the goal, that there's a certain point where this is, we'll give you this if you've come up with a good ledger, and then after that, we're not giving any more money. I mean, is there rules for each type of currency like that, or is that for everybody that has certain limits and games and things that go along with it like that?
Well, this is why I think this is a little bit like the gold rush, right? We're making up rules as we go. We're making up business as we go, and there's going to be scamming. There's going to be all sorts of stuff happening in this thing. And then people are trying to say, I'm going to legitimize myself because now I'm on exchanges. And it's going to be, a little bit of the Wild West all over in this area. But, you have all sorts of people try all sorts of rules, and there is no, and I think that's part of the thing, there's no regulatory environment in this yet, which scares people. There's no protection of individuals if something gets wrong or stolen. It's just a matter of, I've got to be in this, and, it's going from 17,000 to 150,000, and I got to tell people that I'm in it. And, but what that really means at the end of the day is you're going to have, and this is one more reason why the governments are going to do it, is they can't afford to have this get so big that it becomes a disaster and takes the financial system down like a Lehman Brothers almost did.
Well, are you in it?
Nope, not anymore.
No. That's interesting. And are you going to get back in it?
I am a big believer in the digital currencies, and I'm really focused on what the true value creation is, and I still am a value buyer, and try not to be too much of a speculator. I mean, I think that there's a big speculative part to it, and if people want to speculate and say, I want to be in this and I think I could have a huge gain, then they should think about it and think about the risk. And I'm at this stage of my life a lot more conservative than that.
Well,
I'm working very hard for corporations to really, and with the governments, to really ensure that this is done properly. So I'd be talking out of two sides of my mouth if I'd be doing it differently. So I don't. I really embracing what they've done and leveraging that into the future to make it really great and better for everybody, for individuals, for corporations, and ultimately then the shareholders and the investors.
Well, it's a fascinating subject, and I've seen you on a lot of talk shows lately because there's always going to be break-ins, there's going to be security things, and I know a lot of people are worried about that, and they I'm sure go to you to ask what you think, and we really didn't cover all of that today because I really wanted to just focus on what this is, and because so many people are confused. And it was so nice of you, Wolfgang, to really give such a good background, because I can't think of anybody that could explain it better or who knows it more.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you so much. I really do.
It was so fun to talk to you, and I hopefully will have you on the show again. This was great.
All right. Well, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and we'll talk soon.